Hey everybody, it's been a while since I've recorded a podcast. I'm a terrible podcaster, so my apologies for anybody that's been expecting to hear from me lately. I've been working on a YouTube channel lately, and that's still kind of going pretty well. I'm also blogging. A lot of my things that I'm doing, I've shifted and rebranded, so I'm trying to kind of feel everything out, and the podcast is no exception to that rule. I'm going to be recording more often, hopefully, and my back episodes are available again on Spotify and Apple Podcasts if you're interested. Only it's not going to be going by the name of 60 Miles From Anywhere. I'm changing everything over to Shake Some Dust. So it's a line from a TV show that came out a number of years ago on HBO called Carnival, and every time they would load up and everybody would head out in the caravan of carnival people, the guy that ran the whole show would say, "All right, let's shake some dust, children." So that's what I tell my dog every time we get out on the bus and we head out on the road. I guess to update you on some of the things that have been happening in my life lately, one of the more recent podcasts that I recorded, I talked about my first experiences out on the road. To kind of recap, over the last year, I was living up in a small town in the Colorado Rocky Mountains, and the name 60 Miles From Anywhere was a reflection on living up in the mountains and being very remote and having to drive an hour in any direction to even get to the nearest Walmart. My situation changed, as it's changed for a lot of people in this kind of weird post-COVID world that we live in. And boy, there is so much stuff to cover. There's so much ground. And the worst thing about the whole process is just how little any of us are really aware of what's going on out here. It's like they told us to shelter in place and sit around in our houses until the pandemic was over. And then nobody gave us any kind of guidebook as to what happens next after that. There's a lot of people out in this world that are struggling right now, and I am no exception to that rule. I'm making the best out of my situation, though. I can say that. There's so much stuff going on out here on the road, though, that people aren't aware of, and these dispatches are kind of try to encapsulate my experiences of what's happening out here. So my typical normal lifestyle was much like anybody else's that's listening to this show. I was in a house, 4 walls and a roof. You know, you either work remotely, you drive to a job, that kind of thing. But when that changed up, I found myself without a home, and I found myself having to use my resources. And one of those things that I decided to do, I'd been thinking about for years, is to just live out on the road, do the van life experience. And a lot of people are doing that. And not only is it I know it sounds like a vanity thing because we're going by the way that people used to do things, say 20 or 30 years ago. It's no longer that. It's no longer snowbirds that just have the luxury of saying, well, I'm retired, I'm just going to head out on the road. There's a lot of that out here. But there's also a lot of people that are just flat out living in their cars. I mean, van life is kind of just scratching the surface on what's happening. It's almost like mobile Hoovervilles. Now, if you've been to a big city like Denver, Salt Lake, just any big city, San Francisco, Portland, San Diego, LA, you will see tent cities that people have set up. And people are living on the lawns of the Capitol building in Denver right now. There's a lot of controversy as to what's happening there. Now, there's an element of people that are thinking, well, these people are just lazy and they don't want to work and there's jobs out there. The thing is that even though they've raised the minimum wage, rents are exorbitant wherever you can go. And that was one of the things that I was facing when I started out on this whole journey was I could get into an apartment, like some rundown cat piss smelling studio apartment, even with a waiting list for HUD to get into like a rundown apartment. Most places are asking for first, last, and first month's rent for deposit and to get going. So right off the bat, you're looking at probably around needing $5,000 to $6,000 just to get started in an apartment. And that's not even to say that you're going to have a job that's going to make that much money to pay for that. The problem is yeah, sure, there's jobs out there. You see help wanted signs everywhere. But most places are just offering part-time work. There's no benefits with that. Your hours are short. And oftentimes these people are overworked completely because there's such high turnover. Nobody wants to work at a job even that's paying $14 an hour to start. I mean, that sounds like a lot. My first job, my first job, I made $5 an hour. And that was minimum wage way back in the day. That was actually pretty good. It was a little bit higher than minimum wage. And then in college, I made slightly more than that. I don't think I was making $28,000 a year at a job until I was probably close to my 30s. And over the years, it took me decades to build up to $40,000 a year with the job that I had. When I was unceremoniously laid off from my job in higher education, I was only making $47,000 a year. And that was just after 20 years of employment and incremental cost of living raises, say like 3%, 5%. And that was when the state was actually giving them out. So all of that backstory, yeah, $14 an hour to work in a McDonald's might sound great to somebody that's not accustomed to what's going on out there. But when you look at it and you see that rent has probably, I would have to say, tripled in the last 10 years, that's still not cutting it. And it's crazy because the higher they raise minimum wage, well, that's just to say that people are just going to increase the rent. And it's kind of a vicious cycle. So you have a lot of these homeless people, or unhoused as the euphemism goes. And technically, I am a homeless person because I'm living in my vehicle. Now, granted, it's a vehicle that's basically a house with a motor, and it's a motor home, thus the word, but it's still not a very permanent situation. I mean, I could get into a car accident and wind up losing my house and my vehicle in one fell swoop. I could have something happen like, I even hate to mention this stuff because I feel like I'm jinxing myself on a lot of these things. Let's just say that any number of catastrophic things could happen and actually put me out of a home and out of a vehicle at the same time. So let's not get into that very much. I really don't want to do that. I've developed somewhat of a sense of superstitiousness out here on the road. You just don't want to go for that. So where was I going with this whole thing? Anyway, out here on the road, you can see that a lot of people are homeless. A lot of people are not doing this by choice. They're not doing this because it sounded cool or they watched a YouTube video where somebody was living the dream out on the road. I have the luxury of being able to work remotely. When I get gigs, it's just like having a 9-to-5 job. I actually probably work more when I get different clients, depending on what I do. And honestly, I love doing what I do. So it's kind of feast or famine when it comes to getting actual work. But that's beside the point. The point that I'm trying to make here is there's a lot of people without that luxury. There's a lot of people that are just sleeping in their car and they have sleeping bags and they are actually holding down jobs and they're going into work after like washing themselves down with a sponge and maybe a wet washcloth or in a Burger King bathroom or something like that just to get cleaned up enough to go to work. They're working a full shift, and then they're going back out and living in their car again. I know a lot of these people. I've met a lot of these people, and I'm kind of among their ranks. I just have the luxury of having my desk and my office in my vehicle, and I don't have to try to fake it and go into a 9-to-5 job. That's the problem that I'm seeing a lot of the time, is it's this facade. It's this superficial veneer that they put over everything. And as long as that's the status quo, as long as we look like everything is normal, then they don't have to do anything about it. So as long as we can sweep under the carpet the dome tents all over the Capitol building lawn, and our parks that are filled with, they call them sleepers. That's actually the term that I heard, and it actually kind of made me feel sick, because a lot of folks that are living out on the streets are addicted to drugs, or they have severe mental illness that's being untreated. And maybe they're even self-medicating with fentanyl. That's the big drug right now. About 5-10 years ago, it used to be methamphetamine. It used to be heroin. Used to be crack. But now fentanyl is taken over completely. And I don't know if that's been encouraged by the powers that be, because it makes people docile. It makes people just sleepers. I mean, they're like zombies that just hang out on the street corner, and they just literally fall asleep where they sit or where they stand, and they just slump over. And boy, when they're doing that, they're not much of a problem, are they? You just step over them. It's somebody else's problem. I'm saying that in the most sarcastic way possible, because it's horrible. When I was in Santa Fe, that's one of the places that I've driven through. I remember Santa Fe as this place that was just beautiful. It was so much culture, like Southwest culture. It was the embodiment of the Southwest. You had these beautiful adobe buildings. You had the art scene. You had a level of opulence and also wealth that was pretty cool to observe just as a visitor. You still have some of that, but then you also have caravans of people pushing shopping carts up and down Cerrillos Road, like trains of just shopping carts loaded up with junk. And the people are just there to score as much money as they can. $2 will get you high on fentanyl. It's not like people that have a healthy heroin addiction or something like that, where they're looking at hundreds of dollars. $2 will pretty much turn somebody into a zombie for an afternoon. It doesn't take much to get a couple of bucks. You see a lot of panhandling. You see a lot of people that are just maybe even working just enough to score enough money to buy drugs. And it's just kind of ignored. It's just kind of a nuisance. I remember I stopped at a gas station because one of the things out here on the road that I have to keep in mind is fuel, internet connection so I can work, and water. These are things that are constantly on my mind. So I stopped in Santa Fe for a couple of weeks, and free water is the best way to go, because if you had to pay for water, that's a whole other thing. It might even be a completely different show. You can pay probably 25 cents per gallon to use a reverse osmosis machine, or you can get potable water at gas stations, rest stops. There's usually reliable sources of potable water if you know where to look for them. And as I got to Santa Fe, they were starting to run out of water. Well, they weren't running out of it. The availability was running out for people like me, for travelers. So I stopped off at one of the few gas stations in town, over in front of the Smith's grocery store. And I asked if they could unlock their water so I could fill up my tanks. And they were happy to oblige me. I just bought a tank full of gasoline, and they went out and they unlocked it. And they told me they had to lock it because the sleepers would just go out and bathe in it. And they said it with such disgust. And I understand that nobody wants people that are just rolling on some kind of substance. They're unpredictable. A lot of these people are dirty. A lot of these people can get violent and aggressive, and they tend to cluster around places and not leave. So they're really not too happy about people living on the streets clustered around their gas station when they're trying to do business. But at the same time, they had almost no compassion, just the worker at the gas station, that people might actually want to get clean. And just down the road was a homeless shelter. But one of the caveats of being in a homeless shelter is usually you have to be clean, or not clean in that way, but not on drugs, not violent, and people that are more on the scale of being mentally ill or violent or in the midst of a drug binge, they are kind of unpredictable and they're not really welcome in these shelters. And sometimes these people get kicked out and then they just find themselves drifting up and down the street or from city to city, depending if they can get a ride out of town. So they're not exactly welcome in these shelters. They've got nowhere else to go. And at the very least, they need water to drink. They need water to bathe. And I get that the gas station just doesn't want somebody to strip down to their skivvies and shower in front of their gas station, because that's what they would do. They said that, yeah, these people were practically getting naked and bathing in front of the gas station pumps, so they had to shut that off. Or they would leave them and let them run down the street, or they would break things or mess things up. I guess the point that I'm trying to make is I'm not exactly all that far from that place. I mean, I'm not a drug addict. I have a vehicle. I have a place to live. I'm boondocking at the time. And I just thought it was strange how I could be filling up my gas tank and I'm just like right on the edge. Like my money situation at the time was not great. I wasn't sure where my next client was going to come from. Everything had kind of plateaued out. I was starting to get nervous. And I thought, this guy's looking at me as somebody that is, I guess, an equal or a peer or something like that, when really I'm not much different than the people that he's looking down his nose at, because I don't have a house. I don't have four walls. I don't have a mortgage. I'm not paying rent to somebody. I'm paying a vehicle mortgage. What do they call that? Car payment for the place that I'm living at. For me, that was the most reliable and affordable resource that I could do at the time. And besides car payment, I've got car insurance. I've got, other financial responsibilities I'm trying to keep track of. I've got bills to pay. I've got child support. I've got a number of different things. And these people don't. That doesn't sound like freedom if you break down the fact that they can't even get fresh water and they can't even stay clean. Basically, they are living moment to moment long enough to feed an addiction or just survive on a daily basis. They wake up every day and it's just that day is all that they've got. And, I guess I'm kind of going down the rabbit hole on this, but that's pretty much all any of us have, if you think about it. I know that my situation changed pretty dramatically and quickly. Once decisions were made to get me out of that house, I had 6 weeks essentially to find alternatives for my living situation. And I talk about it in a previous podcast. I'm going to work on more just kind of telling people what's on my mind and my thoughts and things like that for these shows. And before I was doing cuts and I was, trying to make everything sound, I was scripting things out. And right now I'm just kind of riffing off and talking at the top of my head. So if I'm wrong, please call me out on a lot of this stuff. Let's have a conversation about this. I think that's a lot of what people are missing out on right now is we're not having conversations about what's going on out there. And what I'm trying to get at is you don't see this in the media. if you do, you hear this kind of like hush hush, poo poo kind of like, oh no, we can't talk about that. That's not, the social justice warrior comes out of the press and then they say, oh, they're not homeless, they're unhoused. And that's where the discussion ends. And it's like, no, these people are broken. And our society is broken. It has been ripped to shreds. And once again, it's just what we can watch people do on TV and the internet and the little political dance and dog and pony show that they're doing in Washington that distracts us from the fact that our country effectively, I think, faced an apocalypse over the last couple of years. And living out here on the road, one of the things that I've noticed is we're not okay. On a deep, visceral level, we're not okay in this country. I mean, so many people are just out here drifting. I am in the middle of the Arizona desert right now, near a place called Quartzsite, New Mexico, Quartzsite, Arizona. And it used to be a place that my grandparents would come and they'd snowbird down here. And there's still a lot of snowbirds down here too. People that are retired, they come down with their RVs. You can live fairly cheap on long-term vehicle access land. And basically you can camp out for several weeks, if not months. They have things like, fresh water and toilets and things like that in different campgrounds. Or you can do like what I'm doing and boondock out in the middle of nowhere. And for me, that kind of works a little bit better, especially with the budget that I'm working for, especially with the fact that I really hate the idea of having to be parked on top of somebody else in a campground. I don't like that. I'd rather just be out in the wild. I would rather be able to look out and see the sunrise or the sunset and let my dog run around and watch for rattlesnakes and that kind of thing, rather than basically being in a trailer court with a whole bunch of other RVs stacked up like sardines for months and emptying your, chemical toilet into the RV dump and all this other stuff. It's just, the whole thing just kind of seems like people are regressing back to what they knew about living in four walls and a roof with a mortgage and a picket fence and a dog in the front yard and all this other stuff. And it's just such a shadow of that. And people are fine with that. But a lot of people aren't doing that. A lot of people are down here because the weather allows them to live in their car. It allows them to panhandle or get around on a bicycle or have a side hustle or something like that. One of the crazy things about this is I wanted to take my dog to California, which is just probably less than 20 miles away. And California rounds out the number of states that my dog has been to. She has now been to all the western states, not the Midwestern states, but she's been to Montana, Idaho, Colorado, Wyoming, New Mexico, Utah, Arizona, Oregon, Washington, and now California. My dog has been to more states than most people have. And it's just kind of funny, too, that we're all supposed to love this country unconditionally. And so many of us have never even hardly left our hometown, our state, and yet we're supposed to love our entire country. And we know nothing about it. We haven't actually gotten out there and seen it. So it's kind of like, I guess, an extended family about, you have some uncle or aunt or somebody, cousin that you've never met, and they show up at your house for a holiday, and you're just supposed to immediately hit it off with them and love them, and it's family, and blood is thicker than water, and all this other stuff. And honestly, I think they kind of want to stovepipe us like this. There's a reason in California gasoline is $5.10 a gallon. I feel bad for people that live in California right now because they we give them a lot of shit. I'll be honest about that. In Colorado, we get upset because the Californians came in and they raised up our property values and we can't even afford to live in our own state, and they just treat Colorado like another California and it's just annexed and all this other stuff. Honestly, after I went into Blythe, California, I realized that Californians are essentially refugees because their standard of living is the same as everywhere else, but they have just so many things that they don't have control over. Like the price of gasoline for them was $5.10 for regular unleaded. Diesel was, I think, $6 a gallon, if not higher. And if they just drive across the border 4 or 5 miles in Ehrenberg, Arizona, they can get gas for roughly $2 a gallon less. So what is that $2 a gallon doing to the people in California? Well, it's essentially keeping them in their place. You can't go anywhere if you can't afford to drive anywhere. And it's a car culture. We don't have trains out here. We don't have walkways. We don't have mass transit that's worth a damn. So essentially what people are doing is they're just staying put at home and only driving to and from work if they can help it. I don't even think they're really carpooling or anything like that. A lot of people are working remotely, and that's not in the eastern part of California. I'm talking about like the bigger cities. How in the hell are these people supposed to get around if it's just so frustrating, because essentially what they're doing is they're phasing out people that don't have that level of income that's disposable enough to afford them to actually leave their homes unless it's absolutely necessary. So when you get that, you basically stovepipe people. They're trapped in one place. They have a very narrow scope of what's going on in their world. And as long as they keep their head down and as long as they keep grinding away at their jobs, then they can just make ends meet. And then maybe if they get 2 weeks of vacation, they can have a staycation. Or maybe they can buy a video game machine and then they can sit there and have a virtual vacation on their stupid Xbox or PlayStation. Or maybe they can just go and blow money on shit that they can't afford, because that constant dopamine drip that you get from just feeding the monkey isn't much different than those people on Cerritos Road nodding off from fentanyl. And we've got social media to thank for that too, because I'm addicted to that stuff myself. I realized yesterday I went to a bookstore. They've got a place called the Reader's Oasis here in Quartzsite. And it's used books, which I love used bookstores. I think that books are one of the most amazing things out there. I am an awful reader. I get a book, I usually read the first 10, 15 pages. If I don't fall asleep, I usually find that I'm getting bored. And then it's weird. It's like I will wake up after I've been reading a book for a little while. I'll wake up and I'll have been scrolling my phone for the last hour and a half. And it's like I was supposed to be reading, but it just doesn't hit the same way that social media does. I mean, gosh, that is just such a clean high. It's like how they used to talk about television, where they could do a brain scan on people when they were watching TV. And they said that basically your brain almost goes into a torpor kind of situation. I don't know if I'm saying that right. It's like what bears do when they hibernate. They're not quite asleep, but they're not quite hibernating, and they're not awake. They're just slowing everything down. And they say that television was very much a very passive process, and that when people are reading books, their mind is firing, it's reconfiguring, it's, the thought process is dynamic. And it's very passive when you just watch TV. I would be curious to find out whether or not social media is actually worse than that, because it's just, you're receiving. you're not participating, you're just receiving. And sometimes if you do put something out there, you get that instant gratification dump of somebody likes a post or something like that. I mean, it's the same kind of high, I would imagine, that you get as a teenager in high school, and there's a girl or a guy or whatever that you see in the hallway, and they smile at you, or they say hi, or you're like, oh, they actually know my name. It's that same kind of hit that you get, that like feel-good feeling for just a brief moment. And it's a drug, and I can tell you, I bought 2 books at the Reader's Oasis, and I've been struggling with reading one of them right now, and it's like I'm having to actually reconfigure my brain, like focus on reading for longer than 5 minutes without picking up my stupid phone and distracting myself. I don't know if it's from social media. I don't know if it's the job that I did at the university for 20 years or what. It feels like my ADHD is just off the charts. And so I've decided, doing my YouTube channel, doing the podcast, writing more blogs, trying to build my business better. Those are things that I need to focus on more than just social media scrolling, because I could look at the stats on my phone that tells me how often I'm on social media. At the worst of it, I would be on that for about 9 to 10 hours a day. And that actually came from working at the university when I was there, because they didn't care what we were doing as long as we were a warm butt in the chair. And I'd been there so many years that I could get all my work done in literally a fraction of the time that it took. So it was like they were actually paying me for the experience that I had over the years and the ability to get everything done quickly and right. And I was just literally watching my life tick away at the clock all day long. But I couldn't go anywhere else. I couldn't do anything else but sit there at my desk. But they didn't care if you scrolled through Facebook all day. One of the ladies that I worked with, she would just look up recipes all day, or she would be on Facebook, or the other lady that I worked with, she would just watch political YouTube videos all day long. They didn't care. As long as we were getting the few things that they were paying us to do done, they didn't care. Until they did. Until they realized that they were losing a fortune because they were paying a bunch of people that had been there for decades full-time pay just to sit on their butts and scroll Facebook all day long. They realized, well, we can just reorganize everybody's jobs and fire them all, and then rehire them at 3/4 the pay, doing 130% of the work. And then we don't have to lose the upper administrators' budgets for their pay raises. So at the end of it, the upper admins were making 6 figures a year. They were paying regular administrative assistants probably 30% less for doing almost twice the work, really. And honestly, the thing that I hated the most about that job was just the boredom, just sitting there at my desk, wanting to do something else with my life, but I couldn't. And I even thought, if I could just go to part-time, I could write at home, I could come in and do my job. I would even take a cut to do my job, but they didn't want that. They just wanted my presence there. And that kind of relates back to the whole stovepiping thing, where it's like, just, what was the expression that they used to use? We're like mushrooms. Keep us in the dark and feed us shit. And that's kind of how all of this stuff feels. It's like the people in California have a right to want to get the hell out of that state and go someplace where they can actually afford gasoline. Now, I don't agree with bringing those same kind of ideals that put them in a situation where they're paying $5 a gallon for gas into a state that isn't like that, and then bringing a lot of those problems. But I kind of wonder now, after going over there and seeing, just the way people are. I mean, they're just still very stunned, I went into a grocery store and there are people still wearing face masks like it's the middle of the COVID pandemic. They're still masked up. They're still social distancing. They're terrified. It was almost like walking into an Eastern Bloc state at the height of the Cold War. These people are shell-shocked. They're numb. And it's any wonder that they get out of that place and then they just go nuts. They go to Texas where it's like, hey, y'all, look at all this freedom we got. And they just go bonkers over it. Or they look at Colorado and they're like, wow, it's pretty like our state. There's a little bit of freedom and people are spread out. And, well, we can terraform it basically with our, politics and everything to make it more familiar. And, man, everything is just a mess and nobody is having conversations about any of this stuff. That's the problem, is everything that we're getting is the news or SNL. God, I can't even watch Saturday Night Live anymore because it is so focused on this crap. I've got no other better word for it. I guess I should probably go to my dictionary and figure out a better word for what I'm trying to say with that whole thing. But honestly, it's just crap. It's how everybody's expected to think and feel about everything. And any divergence from that, well, you're wrong, or you're a fascist, or you're a bigot, or a racist, or anything like that. And it's like, immediately people go on the defensive and the conversation is over. You can't even say, no, I'm not, because, oh, well, that's what they all say. I mean, geez. Anyway, I'm out here in the desert and it's quiet, except for my dog snoring. I don't know if you can hear her through the mic, but it's quiet and it's peaceful. And as long as I've got fuel in my tank and I can keep going and I can keep exploring and meeting people and keeping my eyes open, it gives me a deeper understanding, if not appreciation, of this country that we live in, and this country that we live in that is slowly dying. And I'm not saying that in a way that it's like any kind of political agenda or anything that I adhere to, because I really don't. I'm pretty moderate. I think people should just have a chance to live how they want to live, but that's not what we're seeing. Out here, there's a lot of freedom. People are enjoying their freedom every day. I know I am. And the way that we're expected to live is the opposite of that. We're trapped into our consumerism, especially right now. It's the holidays. And you're supposed to feel like shit if you can't buy the latest and greatest thing for your loved ones and overdraft your accounts and everything for new TV or whatever new thing that they expect you to get, new iPhone, whatever it is. We're supposed to exchange our humanity and stepping over people that are hooked on drugs, sleeping on our sidewalks, and drive past them with blinders on just so we can go to Target and get a new TV and stick it in the back of our car that's not even paid for, that we're paying $1,000 a month for. Not me. I mean, I'm talking about people that have just went out and bought like a brand new Bronco or Yukon or something like that. I mean, car payments are what house payments and mortgages and rent used to be 10 years ago, if not more. And we're just supposed to be fine with that. And we're all just supposed to look at everything and say, well, nothing is wrong here. Please move along. And I think our world is on fire, to be honest. And I do think, and you can disagree with me if you want on this. I mean, if you've gotten this far into the broadcast, I've probably triggered plenty of people, or they've gotten bored and switched it off and they're scrolling their social media by now. But I think our world ended 3 years ago. And I think we're just catching up to it now. And that makes me sad because it ended for very, very many of us. I mean, I think the middle class is dissolving. I think it's falling apart. And I think the upper class is completely clueless to it because nothing has changed for them. They can just throw money at a problem and make it go away. But the money that they have isn't even real anyway. I mean, the people that are considered middle, if not middle upper class, they are so far removed from the people actually calling the shots and running things. These people that are millionaires and billionaires, and they just have no sense of egalitarianism or equity or social anything. They just run shit. And as long as they're getting their cookie, I guess the rest of us can go fuck off. And I don't like that. I don't think we're supposed to like that. But I think we're also distracted that we don't understand that we've been played. We've been played by, if you want to go political, we've been played by both sides. And it's been happening for a long time. And it kind of sucks because once you step away from it, like I've done, I'm kind of on the outside now. You can look back at it from a distance. And boy, it just makes your stomach churn. Anyway, I kind of got off on a tirade about some of the things that I've seen, and I've been talking for the last 40 minutes, so I will have more stories from the road. It'll be a little bit less social commentary, I hope, because honestly, I think I just wanted to kind of get this stuff off my chest and just kind of have an open conversation. I'm eating saltine crackers if you hear the crunch of the mic going on. But that's it for tonight. Stay tuned. There's going to be some more. And I think I'll talk more about places I've been, like Carlsbad Caverns, White Sands, New Mexico, Saguaro National Forest. Oh my gosh, just some beautiful places. Our country is truly amazing and astonishing. And just, I would say the last 1,200 miles that I've covered, I've seen so many different biomes and habitats that it's just incredible. I mean, if you went over to Europe, if you went this far, you would be like in Siberia, practically. You know, you'd start from the west side and you go east and you'd be in a completely different continent. And out here, it's just the Southwest. It's amazing. And there's so much more to see. And the people out here are just great. I mean, I love being around just normal folks. You know, you get away from social media. You get away from the media where everybody's polarized. And you get out here. And the biggest polarizing factor that I've seen out here is people that drive around in those side-by-side ATVs. There are people like me that are like pissed off because they wreck all the roads and it's hard to get any place and it's hard to boondock. And then there's the people that actually have those kind of vehicles and they don't see a problem with it. All of us are mad that the BLM is shutting down the lands, and some of us are just like, well, yeah, it's because the ATV people have ripped up all the land. And then the ATV people are like, no, we haven't. They're just trying to keep us from using our public land. Anyway, that's probably a different show. And hopefully I'll start posting about once a week, maybe once every 10 days. So stay tuned, and I hope you've enjoyed the dulcet sounds of my velvety voice on the airwaves. Be safe out there. Be excellent to each other. Party on. And thank you for listening. Good night. If you've liked this episode, please check out my blog at www.shake-some-dust.com. So that's www.shakesomedust.com. You can also check out my Instagram feed and TikToks and a variety of other things. They're linked all over on my blog too. So there's also going to be a link with this podcast. If you liked what you've heard, please like and subscribe. Check out my YouTube channel, which is at Danger Harris. There's also a link in this description for the YouTube channel. Thanks, and be safe out there. Everything was written, spoken, produced, directed, and edited by me, Clinton A. Harris.